Welcome to today's webinar, a scorecard for optimizing your software licensing and monetization operations, sponsored by Gemalto. My name is Paula Bernier and I'm Executive Editor at TMC. Before I hand off the floor, I wanted to share a quick program note and set up our discussion for today. Our presenters will answer questions during a Q&A session that will follow the presentations. I encourage you to submit your questions to us using the interface on your screen at any time, either during the Q&A or as they arise during the presentations. We'll get to as many of your questions as we can, and any that we are unable to get to will be archived, and I know our presenters will be happy to answer them offline following today's event. Okay, let's get started. The world is moving to the cloud and software, and it's moving fast. More connected devices are populating our world, and security is of paramount importance. Amid all this change and growing requirements, businesses are working to run as lean as possible so they can lower their risks and maximize their profits while better engaging their customers. To address all of the above, intelligent device vendors and software companies need software monetization solutions to help monetize their software and grow their businesses. These solutions can allow for automation and marketing and sales for greater accuracy and reduce costs, empower end users to use online self-service to lower customer support costs, protect intellectual property, and support centralized activation and provisioning of software. Today, our presenters will offer guidance on how you can do all that by optimizing your internal operations to achieve success in this new cloud and software-centric world. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers to talk more about all of this. Jeff Kaplan is Managing Director of THINKstrategies, a strategic consulting company that was founded in 2001 to help clients capitalize on the migration of a technology industry from a product-centric to a services-driven model. He's also the founder of Cloud Computing Showplace and the host of Connected Cloud Summit. Before embarking on these adventures, Jeff helped launch IDC's Communications Industry Research Program in 1983, DataQuest's Worldwide Services Research Program in 1990, and Metaswitch Group's Benchmarking Program in 1995. He's also worked at International Network Services, which was acquired by Lucent Technologies, and has been with Interops Management Solutions. Our other speaker, Jam Khan, is the Vice President of Professional Services for the Software Monetization Division at Gemalto, and he leads a team that is responsible for providing consulting services, product deployments, program management, and customer support while ensuring customer success globally. Jeff, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you very much, Paula, and thank you all for joining us today. It's a pleasure to be with you. And my role in all of this is to talk about some of the forces that have shaped the software industry over the past couple of years and are really reshaping it as we go forward, and to bring out some of the highlights of a white paper that we produced in conjunction with Gemalto in the preparation and development of the scorecard we're going to talk about today. So in essence, what I'm going to do is talk about the market drivers, the organizational issues, and the business best practices that organizations have that they can take advantage of and ought to put in place, more importantly, in order to respond to today's market trends and to optimize the software monetization opportunities available to them. Now, before we get started, I'm actually going to pass the ball back to you, Paula, so you can poll the audience about where they stand today and why they're actually here, and what are the issues that have driven them to look at the kinds of issues we're going to talk about over the next hour or so.
That's right. Thanks a lot, Jeff. So we have our first poll question, and audience members, if you could please take a look at the question on your screen and quickly weigh in on one of the four choices. The question is, what is the most important reason for your interest in scoring the readiness of your software licensing and monetization operations? And if we'll just give you a quick minute to weigh in. And while we're waiting, I'd like to mention the monitoring capabilities of software monetization solutions can provide a continuous feedback loop on how end customers are using software so businesses can better tune their packaging, pricing, and products to be more relevant in the marketplace. I think that's one of the especially interesting aspects of software monetization solutions. Okay, it looks like the results are in. So it looks like 57.1, all of the above, and pretty equal for all the other three choices. Jeff, did you have any thoughts that you wanted to share on the results here?
Absolutely. In fact, this really confirms why we're here. We do believe that there are a series of market forces that are definitely changing the way we have to think about software, how we package and price software, and it's becoming more and more relevant because software is driving a lot of corporate priorities and affecting the way organizations operate. So that, again, is going to be my task over the next 15 or 20 minutes or so to provide that context, and I'm going to hand the ball over to Jam after that so he can talk more specifically about what we're trying to accomplish with the scorecard and how we've organized it to address some of these issues. So, let's talk a little bit more about what's going on in the world. As we see it, the world is, and the business community in particular, is facing a perfect storm. First of all, of course, what we're seeing are new customer attitudes about technology, but more importantly about the products and services that we're acquiring across almost every industry. We want those at our fingertips. We're in an on-demand environment, and those customer attitudes are changing the way in which customers select their vendors and their attitudes towards those suppliers as well. As a result, of course, every business is thinking about new ways of responding to those changing customer demands. And the good news is that we've seen a tremendous acceleration and explosion, in fact, in technological innovations to respond to some of these requirements. The challenge, of course, is taking a look at the new engagement models that are required in order to be successful, in order to be able to compete in today's intensifying marketplace. And that intensification has actually come from a number of different places. The world is changing. We all know that globalization is becoming the catchphrase in almost every industry, and the barriers to entry have fallen in almost every industry today, and we all need to react to that. But more importantly, the nature of the consumer interaction in many industries is also changing. Mobility has put access to information, access to products and services at our fingertips, and being able to respond in what a lot of people refer to as the omni-channel environment is becoming more and more important. And with that consumerization effect, of course, the tables have turned. The consumer is now in control, and being able to manage that customer relationship is becoming more important. And, of course, all of this is being driven by software. So as we look at the market today, we see the change in the attitudes of many about what it takes to be a market leader. Some of you may recall about 20 years or so ago, there was a book that was published about the discipline of market leaders, and it talked about market leaders having to focus in on one of three areas of competency, and most likely not being able to become a leader in all three of these areas, whether it's customer intimacy, product leadership and differentiation, or operational excellence. Well, in today's world, we don't have the luxury of being able to choose one of these three. Instead, we have to become competent in all three areas because they're all intimately interrelated. And because of that, we have to think differently about how we design our products and services so that we can better satisfy our customers, but as Paul alluded to a moment ago, how we monitor and measure our customer use of those products and services so that we have a better understanding of where and when and how we can best meet their needs to improve our operating efficiency. With all those things in mind, of course, mobile devices tend to be the point of growing interaction with a lot of customers. And of course, it's not about the device, it's about the software that's not only powering the device, but is powering the apps that most people are using on those devices. And increasingly, those apps are being sold as a service, and in many cases, they're being sold on a per-usage basis. So the way in which the software is designed, the way in which it's priced, the way in which it's monetized is changing. And as a result, we need to put new mechanisms in place, both monetization tools, but also organizational processes in place to manage those applications more effectively. Now, of course, as we look at customers, they become more and more accustomed to the new interfaces that are available through a variety of mobile devices. But we as providers of those applications and services need to do the same thing. And as Gartner has pointed out, marketeers are recognizing that it's all about that customer experience because the customer experience will really govern the way in which the engagement occurs between the supplier and the customer. And as we go forward, of course, all of us will be thinking about how we can enhance that customer expectation and experience so that we can tighten that engagement process. So there are a number of opportunities that are arising, in many cases because of the cloud. It gives us greater connectivity, it gives us greater access to information, but at the same time, we're seeing a wider array of devices, products, and services becoming connected as well because of the rapid advancements in nanotechnology, which has helped to reduce the cost of sensors that can now be placed on almost anything. And with the advent of the cloud, those sensors can be connected to almost anything. And that means we have the greater opportunity of measuring how products and services are being utilized and, in fact, change the algorithm, if you will, of how we package, price, monetize, and measure the value of those products and services along the way. Now, this is not only taking place in the consumer world, but in fact it has its roots in the industrial marketplace as well, in the realm of machine-to-machine type connectivity and intelligence, which has been in place for many, many years, but is coming out of the shadows because of the advent of the cloud and other technologies, which is making it more prevalent across a variety of different industrial environments. Well, at the same time, of course, everybody is talking about the digital transformation process and how digital marketing is impacting the consumer world. So this connectivity is changing the way in which we think about products and services, and in turn, we have to change the way we think about the software that powers these new opportunities and how we package, price, and monetize those. And that connectivity, of course, is giving us new opportunities to change the engagement model. And the new product innovations that are being advanced by companies like Amazon with the one-touch capabilities of its Dash tools, allows us to better understand how customers are utilizing our products, and in fact, even anticipate when they may need to be replenished with those same products as well. And of course, everybody's talking about the prospect of driverless cars here in the Boston area where I reside. We're not sure if that's going to be a panacea or further Pandora's box given the way people drive around here. But the more important point is that it represents probably the best example of how software is changing everything, and the way in which we think about software also has to change. It's not only about the creature features that go along with cars today, or the prospect of the self-driving nature of them tomorrow, but it has a lot to do with all of the meters that are now being put on cars that enable us to better understand how they're actually being utilized, when they might need to be serviced before a problem even occurs, and how they can continuously be improved so that the customer experience is enhanced, but at the same time, the operating efficiencies of manufacturing and supporting those vehicles can also be improved. And of course, there's no better example of these possibilities than what Tesla has done over the past decade or so, and a lot of other manufacturers are trying to catch up and maybe even advance. The bottom line of all of this is we're trying to use these new tools and techniques to better target our solutions, to better meet our customer needs, and better compete in increasingly challenging environments. And these kinds of issues are affecting every industry. At the same time, what it's doing is providing new opportunities across a variety of industries as well. I want to just spend a couple of moments talking about a couple of examples of how software is changing industries today and give you some thoughts about where it might be going in the future. The first example is a company here in the Boston area called Philips Lighting. Now, if you know Philips, you know that they've been in the light bulb business for a very long time. But if you know anything about the light bulb business, you know that there are two things happening there. Number one, with the new advancements in lighting, light bulbs have a longer lifespan, and as a result, suppliers like Philips have less opportunities to continuously make money just supplying new bulbs. At the same time, of course, with globalization, the competitive landscape in the light bulb business has also helped to commoditize it. So what Philips had to think about is how to change its business from selling light bulbs to selling lighting services. And in fact, it's developed a managed lighting service, which has really taken off. And it's a service that's powered by software because it's now in the position where it can remotely manage the lighting within various buildings and provide intelligence about how those lights are being utilized and help the users of those lights get greater efficiency and effectiveness from them as well. All of which, again, powered by software. Emerson is known for its commercial and consumer products and is often referred to as a leader in both heating and cooling systems. And once again, they're using software to remotely manage and deliver what they now refer to as comfort services aimed at better regulating the temperature within various buildings, whether they be commercial or residential. And the folks over at John Deere are finding that more and more of the users of their heavy equipment are trying to extend the life of that equipment. And in fact, the equipment does last longer than ever before. And John Deere is thinking about how they can add value to that equipment and has put more and more sensors on the equipment so they can generate more information about how that equipment is being used. And as a result, John Deere is pursuing opportunities to deliver information services and greater intelligence to the users of that equipment, whether it be in agriculture or other settings, and as a result provide a value-added capability that can differentiate them in an otherwise challenging marketplace. In all three instances, we're talking about software-enabled capabilities and new ways of delivering value which need to be packaged and priced, and therefore we need to think about new ways of monetizing the value of that software. No one has said it better than GE, and Bill Rue over at GE Digital said it best when he said any industrial business that does not become a software business will not be relevant. And what we're seeing is more and more companies following the lead of GE and looking at ways in which they can ensure that they're relevant going forward. Now, for all of them, they have to, again, think about how they need to repackage and reprice their products and services in this new digital world. And it's not a one-time only process. It's a continuous process because of the changing nature of the solutions themselves, because of advancements in technology and software, but also, of course, because of the changing dynamics of consumer expectations and the competitive environment around us. So what we at THINKstrategies have been talking about is thinking about software monetization readiness in terms of your products, your organizational policies and processes, and the nature of your business objectives going forward. And this matrix tries to put all of this into context as you think about your readiness to address these issues. You know, for a lot of folks, they started in the lower left-hand corner with very ad hoc business processes around software monetization, primarily thinking about ways in which they can best protect the intellectual property that is represented by that software itself. As they become more mature, they think about ways of better governing the software and the software development and delivery process. And then they start to think about ways to better package that software so that it could be delivered in a more consumer-friendly fashion and improve that customer experience and the nature of the engagement process. And ultimately, what they're attempting to do as we move to the upper right, of course, is to maximize the economic value of that software, not only from the supplier's point of view, but obviously from the customer's standpoint as well. So those are the kinds of things that are driving this marketplace, the forces that are shaping the marketplace, and some of the ideas that you as a ISV, whether an established ISV or an emerging ISV from an enterprise environment, have to begin to think about. And that's what our scorecard is all about. And that's where I'm going to hand it off to my friend Jam to talk more about how do you score yourself to ensure that you are ready to monetize the value of the software you're developing. So Jan, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Always educational and instructional. I have to confess, after hearing examples like managed lighting services and Tesla and such, I find that I'm left to the part that's a little less sexy, but I think a vital part of making all that Jeff talked about actually operational. It's the dirty work that has to be done, the plumbing that needs to be put in place to make sure that all of these initiatives, when we're ever so keen on monetizing our software in more creative ways, it's imperative to make sure that the functions in the supporting systems behind you are well designed to allow you to take full advantage of this. So why score licensing readiness? Well, for one, we want to identify weak spots. We want to determine how prepared are you. Are your systems ready for you to actually implement some of the decisions that business is making? You're looking at where you're heading, in a short-term plan as well as a long-term plan in an organization, and not having a good handle on your licensing readiness can often be an impediment, and it is an impediment, as you'll find out as you go through this presentation. How many different organizational units are impacted by it, and all the different areas that need to be factored in to ensure you're optimized and have the engine finally tuned, as it were. So I'm going to start at the beginning, which sounds a bit redundant, but far too often projects like this are driven by a very specific burning problem or use case. There might be a particular department that's feeling a little more pressure. It might be a customer service group, might be some rev rec issues. Maybe there's a product line that's not properly licensed or is having some very specific issues, and that ends up driving the business. This means their needs might skew the project from being, as holistic as one might prefer. And one of the common problems is not getting an upfront big picture problem. Do you know where you stand today? Do you understand the full scope of what you want to achieve, or is it being driven by a particular group that maybe has a budget, maybe has a problem, and tends to prioritize something that isn't necessarily aligned with the long-term corporate goals? So the first part that we see in any kind of implementation that wants to score your licensing readiness is just the upfront assessment challenges. And through the rest of this presentation, I'll kind of walk you through what areas need to be factored in to help alleviate that. So it's really important to begin with a methodology. There are going to be varying initiatives that drive a licensing program. These include items like business process optimization, customer satisfaction, operational efficiency. Each department and stakeholder is going to have issues relevant to them that need to be addressed when undergoing a fundamental change in methodology. What doesn't always happen is an attempt at quantifying the pain points, prioritizing them, and then creating KPIs. Without establishing some baseline metrics, it's very difficult down the road to measure success. What are your KPIs today? Are they applicable to your business? Are they relevant? They're going to vary depending on the business, maybe even depending on business unit and product line, but you need to define some success factors. You need to understand what it is you're trying to achieve as a business and work backwards and understand if you've put in the right checks in place to make sure that it's not change for the sake of change, but the engagement you're undertaking is actually going to yield positive results. far too often these projects don't have quantifiable metrics. They're really qualitative. They're built by either customer satisfaction issues or too many homegrown systems, too many bespoke systems, but they're not metrics put in place to measure the efficiency of what the overall initiative is trying to achieve. Now, one step to achieving that is, you've got to dig down into the details. At some point, you need to get into the weeds a little bit and understand the extent of the problem you're trying to solve. How many licensing technologies, have been created and put in place? How many of them are homegrown? How many departments are involved in maintaining these homegrown systems? Oftentimes, you don't even know the extent of the problem until you start digging deeper and deeper into it and uncovering a lot of skeletons in the closet. What do customers deal with when they face issues like rehosting, revoking licenses, relicensing, moving from one site to another? Do you understand all of the impact that your current licensing system has on all your customers? Or is it just a squeaky wheel that's getting all the attention? One question to ask yourself is, how much tribal knowledge exists? Quite often, these systems have been developed to serve a very specific use case or a very specific business function, and either it's highly dependent on certain functions, or the people who developed the system in the first place have moved on, and now you're basically just in maintenance mode. So, understanding how your licensing system works, digging into all of the details, after you've taken a big picture view of things and established some sort of high-level metrics, it's really important to dig down and find out where some of the real pain points are, and just scope out the extent of the problem that's being solved. Knowing that's going to factor into determining what your final score is going to look like. So I always refer to the licensing GoToGuy because every organization has one. The reality is that we all have licensing in some way, shape, or form, whether it's paper licensing, whether it's audits, whether it's homegrown licensing, which for most software companies is the norm. There's something has been developed, and it's either developed at a specific point in time to serve a problem, but there's somebody out there who ends up maintaining and managing a lot of this. This is often a result of having a poorly organized process, lack of automation, enhancements happen in silos. There's no governing policy, and temporary workarounds end up becoming permanent fixtures. Holding it all together is this licensing person. Getting their input and perspective and their validation is a key component of developing a comprehensive scorecard. Unfortunately, this licensing person doesn't always think about a future state, not because they don't know, but because they're barely keeping the current state afloat and making it work. And the reason is that they are usually so many fractured and unconnected systems, because generally licensing tends to get deprioritized or tends to get developed in different functions and in different silos, that this person is basically the glue stringing all these sort of various components together. So a key part of establishing a good baseline and creating some metrics is to conduct some interviews and have this licensing, whether it's a person or a group of people or a committee, highly involved in the prioritization and ranking of all of the different areas that are going to impact and influence your ultimate scorecard. Now, IT systems need to be interoperable. Like, licensing data is most useful when it's a core part of your daily business function. This is the one area that ends up, getting most poorly implemented, and it's probably one of the reasons why licensing gets deprioritized. Release after release or year after year. The value of it isn't usually appropriately articulated in an organization. So in order to tie licensing with orders and trials and renewals, and you need to use licensing to send product usage information and activation metrics that give you a true health check of your business, you need to have a fully integrated back office system in place. From order entry to customer fulfillment, there are multiple systems involved that need to be connected and need to speak to each other, and that doesn't always happen. So, where does licensing fit in your organization today? Is it a pretty bespoke system? Is it siloed? Is it integrated, but was it kind of integrated in in a choppy fashion, or is your licensing fairly streamlined and well connected to your ERP and CRM systems? Are you in survival mode, or are you in a place where you can really start thinking about the future state? Think about the new ways you want to price and package your software. When you talk about software powering everything, and software driving the automobile industry, and all these different functions right now that want to try and extract more value out of their software. You need to have all of these software licenses really tightly connected with your operational systems, so that you can really enable the monetization that you're trying to achieve. Otherwise, if your software licensing and the payment terms aren't closely tied together, you can't really realize the true extent to what you're trying to get out of a monetization strategy. And that's usually where the disconnect ends up coming in, and you circle right back to that firefighting mode, comes back to that licensing guy that's then doing all of this manually. So it ends up working, it just doesn't end up working very optimally. Which kind of segues into a very neglected part of any sort of initiative, which is policy and governance. A subject like licensing is often an odd stepchild of an operational business process. Every organization has it, yet few of them spend the time to define proper ownership around it. So as a result, you rarely end up with defined policies in place that dictate the behavior consistent across products and departments. More so, there's usually no established governance around things like who creates or modifies or updates policy, how are exceptions handled. Without some sort of policy in place, even the best laid out systems start to veer off course. Do you know what your licensing policy is? It's a valid question to ask yourself as you start thinking about a licensing initiative. If this is one of your vital business functions, and it is, shouldn't it be sort of defined by a good corporate governance and licensing policy? It's not the most sexy task to define a licensing policy, and you won't find people jumping up in an organization volunteering for it, but it's vital to ensuring the ongoing health of any kind of initiative you put in place. Whether you choose to invest a lot of time and resource into a homegrown system, or you leverage third-party systems, if you don't have the right checks and balances, you don't have the right policies in place, you're not ensuring that the system is used to its full potential, used consistently, and over time, processes start to fragment. Now, as software continues to proliferate and organizations look increasingly to monetize software, the exposure to customers becomes all the more sensitive. How easy is it for your customers to access your software? You're starting to see myriads of combinations of features and modules that, are they improving your customer experience, or is the complexity of all these various modules having the opposite effect? Do customers know what they're entitled to? Is it a smooth and simple customer experience? Understanding how your customers are actually able to consume your software is sort of a vital part of any kind of licensing scoring initiative. So, understanding how a customer consumes the software, consumes the license, how can they upgrade? They're all so tightly connected that they really need to be factored into your assessment. This wasn't the case in the past when we used to, ship products either via, which we still do via, hardware appliances, and used to either sell a box, or even before that, there'd be CDs and DVDs going out with software, and getting the software in the customer's hands was maybe a little simpler, and the pricing around it was a little simpler. But now we're looking to create a completely different kind of software experience. We want to make it more modular, so customers aren't buying what they feel they don't need. The customer is dictating a lot of the purchasing behavior right now. That's why you see the move towards subscriptions, and further on, people want to do usage-based licensing because customers want to consume only the software that they feel they want to use. The way to control that is to give them more choices, but you've got to create these choices without adding complexity. And a lot of that comes down to how you enable and disable features and functions. Licensing can be a vital part of that, but it's got to be simple. It's got to be simple. It's got to be clean. A lot of time needs to be spent into the user experience that traditionally has never been factored into scoring your licensing readiness. You people would focus on internal operations and see how well prepared they were. You wouldn't spend a lot of time thinking about user experience and customer satisfaction as part of a licensing program, but it is, and it ties really closely into it. And if you're looking to monetize all these various aspects of your software, and if you're like most vendors, you're looking at not only improving and enforcing licensing terms, but also understanding better how your products are being used. So you need to build systems that not only gather usage metrics, but know how to consume them and process them in a meaningful way. So this data needs to be fed back into systems that impact the business. Product development, pricing, feature monetization, all these areas where product usage insight can tie into how you can better price and package your products, what features need more development, what features are maybe redundant, understanding product usage, getting the analytics. This requires an assessment of how well equipped your current systems are to handle this sort of data. It's one thing to gather the data, but most organizations fall short in how to consume and actually act on that data once they have it. So what ends up happening is, product development builds all these checks in to get this information back, but it hasn't been well coordinated so that this information gets consumed and becomes actionable. And so quite often in a licensing system, product insight and analytics isn't quite factored in. It's considered a non-core part of a licensing strategy, but it's very intimately tied into understanding how operationally ready you are. And we see numerous examples of customers that have means to collect and gather info, certainly much more straightforward in a SaaS world. But even then, feeding that in and getting the right analytics and then tying that into your pricing, if that's all well coordinated with your licensing system, that's when you start to get some really interesting and actionable data. That's when you can understand how slight tweaks to licensing terms and pricing and packaging can have meaningful impact on your bottom line. And that's where a well put together system starts to really yield good results. So having mentioned all the points above, until now it's still a very daunting task to develop a scorecard. The items we've discussed so far are a basis to start, but you can't get hung up on perfect metrics, and that's usually what ends up, swaying people from trying to score businesses. You either don't know where to begin, or you start to score in such detail that the process becomes far too numbers driven. You lose sight of what the real corporate goals are. The main objective here is to establish a baseline which you can measure against. Over time you can keep improving the metrics. You'll adjust your priorities over time and those will also impact your score. But you can track progress over time. Some examples of metrics could be customer satisfaction that can be measured by customer surveys. It's not 100% scientific, but it gives you a baseline. How many homegrown systems do you have? It's an important metric that feeds into a scorecard. You need to prioritize your business needs and establish some baselines and help you develop a scale. And once you've developed the scale over time, not only can you fine-tune it and adjust it, but you get to understand how certain adjustments in your business impact your licensing efficiency. Is your score improving? Are the KPIs as a result that you established starting to reflect that improvement? How do you know that the investment that you made in this technology is paying off? Not only is it useful for whoever it is that owns licensing as a program to measure this, but it also forms a basis for a terrific ROI for future investment and optimization and improvement in these systems when you really start to tie together the improvement in your bottom line, improvements in revenue, improvements in customer satisfaction, and improvements in just your overall operational efficiency. So there's no sort of foolproof plan on scoring a business, but as a starting point, we've developed a best practices scorecard. There's a couple of different versions. You'll find on our website a high-level scorecard that gives you a starting point to just see, a basic grading. How well prepared are you? Are you okay? things are running well, or are you currently running a fairly fractured system? But what we end up doing, as quite often as a professional services organization, is going in there and then taking that several levels deeper, where we can either give instructions on how to develop a scorecard, or help develop one for an organization, but really get into some detailed metrics that factor in business goals, priorities, existing systems, create a set of metrics that help you not only create a licensing policy, but have a scorecard that can be used for the ongoing health of your business, something to measure the investments that you're making, and really start to tie licensing into the real health of your business, and not just a means to enforce customer usage or gather product usage information, or just establish licensing terms, but use licensing as a means to really understand the true health of the business. And when I say health of the business, it's because we often measure business health by revenues or by margins, but you don't until you know how customers are using your product, that you ship product. A good incorporated licensing system can tell you the difference between what a customer is entitled to, what they activated, what they are actually using, and that gives you the true nature of how the value of your products and the health of your business. And if you're looking truly at software monetization, which in our world that means getting the most value out of your software and determining where the most of that value exists, the best way is to really take advantage of that data and then feed it into your system, so you can get much better understanding of how products are used. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to the Q&A section.
Great. Thanks so much, Jam. Great job, Jam and Jeff. As I mentioned earlier, audience members can submit their questions by typing them into the webinar interface. So let's get started with the first question. Jam, it looks like this one is for you. How do I use the scorecard approach to build a business case or motivate change at my company?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things that we often hear is, we have this licensing initiative. There's somebody who's convinced that this is really important and core to the business, but because licensing isn't often well tied into systems, it's not mission critical. So nothing's going to break. We've got it running right now, and we've got somebody who knows how to manage it. There's megabytes of spreadsheets. And so let's do this next quarter, or let's push this out 1 year, to the next year, because we've got other more pressing initiatives. That might well be true, but a licensing scorecard not only helps you understand the impact throughout the organization that licensing has, but it helps you really quantify how well designed you are. And we found that oftentimes that will allow you to gauge how well suited you are in a competitive landscape, as well as show how much room for improvement that is. Gives you some much better data when you're making a business case internally for funding a project around licensing.
Thanks. And there's another question. I think it's probably for you too, but Jeff may want to weigh in. What do you think are the top 3 steps to success to do software licensing and monetization right in today's changing marketplace?
So I'll start, and then I'm sure Jeff has some thoughts on this as well. One of the things is along the lines of the theme of this session, which is really understanding the end-to-end scope of the problem. It's not an untrue statement that it's usually these licensing projects are driven by a specific group's kind of burning need of the day. There's some problem that's bubbled up to the point that it needs to be solved, and that's driving the initiative. So it's rare that these initiatives are really looked at holistically. So I think the number one is even if you're not going to take the time to develop a comprehensive scorecard, to spend the time to get an assessment of the complete scope of the problem, and then the other part would be to really tie that to the current business. If you're looking to, and most companies are looking to see, how am I going to be pricing tomorrow versus today? there's not too many organizations that are sitting there saying our pricing and packaging is optimal. We're set for the next 10 years. So connecting the dots between your pricing and packaging goals and how licensing can help enable them without being a deterrent, I think is a key part of getting it right, and then ensuring that it's a cross-functional initiative. One of the biggest issues here is that it's usually a department driving it, or there's departments involved that don't often sit down at the table at an organization. Customer service, engineering, IT, operations. This is a business process initiative as much as it is technical, in fact more so. So getting a good cross-functional team and cross-functional representation so that you understand all the different impacts, I'd say those are sort of three of the key aspects to getting it right.
Yeah, Jim, I think that's terrific. And, I'll just add a couple of points to maybe provide another perspective on this. Number one, of course, as you alluded to, we talked about it's a continuous process. Just like the development of software has become an agile process, so has the idea of software licensing and monetization, because the marketplace, with both customer demands and competitive pressures, continue to change on a moment-by-moment basis. So you've got to think about the licensing and monetization processes changing on an ongoing basis as well. That's number one. Number two, the idea that you're trying to do licensing just to protect an asset is no longer the way to be thinking about it. Again, it's about thinking about new ways of enabling licensing to permit different forms of packaging and pricing to occur. And then number three, monetization, of course, is the goal, but monetization is really the representation of the value of the product and service you're providing. And the kinds of tools that you were talking about, Jam, that allow us to now measure how customers are actually utilizing products and services gives us a very good sense of how much they value those products and services as well, and therefore helps us better understand how to maximize not only the value, but obviously the monetization opportunities surrounding that.
Thanks. Here's another question. Can you provide examples of ISVs that have used new software licensing and monetization tools and techniques to change their businesses and find greater success?
I'm going to leave that one to Jam. I gave a couple of examples with Philips, with Emerson, and with John Deere in my part of the presentation. Jam, do you have any examples of companies you guys have worked with?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll speak to just, both companies that have used our technologies as well as companies that have just implemented, creative, solutions on their own, just because, a lot of organizations are a little sensitive to wanting to talk about who they use. So, I'm not going to specify who uses us and who doesn't, but you see a lot of creative use of licensing. Several years ago, Cisco started creating, their licensing engine, and they created an entire portal around, activating and activating features on their boxes. And the whole drive was, this is almost 10 years ago, saying, hey, we're not a hardware company, we're a software company. And licensing was a means to start establishing value in the software, and start getting their, customers aware of what they're actually paying for, and enforcing term licenses, and starting to use licensing to conduct audits and shift the mindset to start establishing value in software. We've seen there's companies out there like Aspen Technologies that have developed a token system where they very creatively allow you to just buy, you don't purchase a particular title, you just buy kind of these tokens, and then you go in the portal and you consume as much software as your tokens allow you to. Think of going to an arcade where, I'm probably dating myself here, but you'd get tokens, and you'd certain games or certain it took some tokens, 1 or 2 or 4, and they kind of treat software that way and say, look, it's all you can eat, but you just pay for what you use. These are a few examples, but you're starting to see a lot. The most common is the move to subscription, and there's countless examples there where hardware companies want to start moving away from perpetual and onto subscriptions, and they're using licensing as a way to enforce 1, 2, or 3 year terms, and then kind of automate the renewal process.
Okay, here's another question. One of the listeners says an additional issue is that each of our strategic software providers has a different initiative and different ways of working with their customers. How would we access an advisory service with expertise in so many different providers such as SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, etc.?
Jam, you're in the middle of this on a daily basis. Why don't you respond to that one?
So is the question of how does the ISV themselves help kind of integrate their software or have their software work with all these multiple systems, or can you repeat that question?
My read on it is that how does the customer using the software monetization solution, do you have any thoughts on experts they might work with that would have expertise in integrating a variety of software makers' models into these solutions?
I got you. Okay, makes sense. That's a trickier one. I mean, there's a lot of systems integrators that do specialize in tying together these back office systems and making sure everything kind of interconnects. For our part, we work to integrate our kind of solutions into multiple systems and keep them kind of as seamless as possible. But that's a lot of this depends on the licensing that's been deployed by the software vendor. And if I understand the question right, a lot of it stems from the reason that a lot of software publishers build homegrown systems, and these systems aren't necessarily built with those next sort of 3 or 4 steps in mind. They're built with a very specific use case, like I want to sell trials, so figure out how to have a 30-day trial license. So somebody in development quickly conjures up a homegrown system. You're not thinking through, how is this going to interop with other systems? How am I going to incorporate this into a portal? How is it going to plug into other systems? So, this goes back to understanding your own sort of level of readiness. But it definitely, I'd say, definitely the more standardized licensing becomes with software publishers, the easier this interoperability will get.
And Jeff, was there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Well, I think just to turn it around from the software provider standpoint, Jam, a lot of what we're talking about here is putting the decision making around the licensing process into its proper context. And I think the question does also apply to the vendor themselves, because so many times, whether it's an established ISV or an enterprise moving into the software realm, they have to take into consideration the way in which others are packaging and pricing their own offerings, and use those reference points in the way in which they themselves are going to package and price their new software solutions. So, our scorecard is primarily aimed at responding to those requirements, and can provide folks with a better understanding as to whether or not they're taking those considerations fully into account.
Thanks. And then one of the audience members was wondering how the Internet of Things conversation figures into this whole discussion. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Well, I'd love to take the lead on that one, because that's one of my favorite topics. And I think it really has brought the idea of software licensing and monetization to the forefront, because even with a couple of the examples that I alluded to during the course of my talk about the automotive industry, for instance, or what's happening with a company like John Deere, or even Emerson and Philips, all of them are capitalizing on the new connectivity that's available because of both sensor technology and the cloud, all of them are recognizing that that kind of functionality needs to be embedded into all of their products and services, and as a result, it's changing the way in which they have to think about the packaging and pricing of the software value and functionality that really powers those new capabilities. So in many ways, if it wasn't for the Internet of Things, this wouldn't be such a essential and important issue, but because of the combination of IoT, software as a service models that have emerged over the past decade or so, the whole idea of the consumption model is a part of this as well. All of these forces are converging at about the same time and putting more and more pressure on organizations to find better ways of managing that software licensing and monetization process.
Thanks. So it looks like we're just about out of time, but let me just ask one of my own questions, and this is how I like to end every interview that I do. JM, if there's just one thing that you're hoping listeners will take away from this webinar, what is that one thing?
Well, given that it was a session on licensing Scorecard, I hope that, you know, I don't mean it to be a shameless pitch for our scorecard, but it's more food for thought around, you know, how many of these things that we talked about today are really factored into, you know, your initiatives around licensing, and hopefully just taking a broader perspective and trying to add some sort of metrics for measurement that kind of help customers get a little more organized and help them quantify the scale of the problem a little bit better. It's a work in the trenches. It's not always the flashy stuff, but it's the plumbing that helps the systems work.
Great. I wanted to remind the audience members that this webinar will be available on demand starting later in the week. Please look for an email from us providing details on that, and please feel free to share that email with your colleagues who you think may be interested. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Thanks again to our presenters and to our sponsor, Gemalto. Have a great day, everybody.